All right. Does anyone have any questions that want to start off with?
Don't be shy.
So I'll start. I'm Pam, and I just signed up a few days ago. It's not even been a week, I don't think so. And Jonathan, you communicated with me because I'm the one without an iPhone, and so I have this iPad and figuring it out, but it's working. So I had written in my information, and it's in there, that I'm totally plant-based. I have been since 2013 and have no intention on changing that. And thank you also for sending all those recipes.
You're welcome.
So I have definitely my work cut out for me to look through and make a shopping list and get some of that, because I think that's one of my problems. I've been just eating a lot of the same things. And you know, just, it's so repetitive, which is maybe some of us tend to do that in a busy life, and it's just convenient and that's what you have and you do it. But I don't know. I just think that's kind of lent itself to some negative things happening. I was surprised at so many recipes that have like vegetables early in the morning. I've been such an oatmeal person, and sometimes I'll do like roasted sweet potatoes and actually kind of make a smoothie with them, which sounds probably kind of weird, but sweet potatoes and some blueberries or something, and milk, non-dairy, of course. And this morning I actually did make a shake, after my run and swim, with like a couple bunches of, well, not bunches, but a couple handfuls of the spinach, and then some protein powder and blueberries. And it was really good. And I was surprised at how full I felt so long and how good I have felt today with that. So, but I was surprised at veggies so early. I guess it's just not our standard American.
Yeah, I think, and welcome on board, Pam. I think if you've ever heard me talk before, I bang on a lot about vegetables, but you know, you are meant to get in sort of 5 to 6 serves or more vegetables a day. And if you think about the typical, again, if we go through the typical American sort of diet, it won't be until lunch that you may consume some form of salad. And if that's in a wrap or a sandwich, it's not really going to be a full serve, is it? And then you get to dinner and then you might have 1 or 2 serves of vegetables. You're actually missing the point from a World Health Organization or an actual nutritics or dietetics type standpoint, of actually missing from just a basic health standpoint of hitting your daily vegetables. And you're a vegetarian. And if you're not hitting it, then there's a good chance people who are eating meat and things like that certainly aren't hitting their daily amount. So I think it's just a mind shift and a mindset in terms of saying, you know, why can't you eat? And I would also, you know, challenge you, or at least encourage you, to try and eat some salad as a whole food form in the morning as well, not just in a liquid form, because obviously when you're breaking it down, you're breaking down the matrix of the food. By blending it, you are reducing like the fiber in terms of the actual you know, the matrix of the fiber. By blending it up, you're reducing that. So that is going to have an impact on potentially on, say, like the sugar content and the way in which your body reacts to whatever you're taking in, because the actual product is being broken down. So, you know, eating a salad in the morning with that, you know, arugula or baby spinach, with sweet potato, with rice, with quinoa, with lentils, what if there's tofu, tempeh, seitan, whatever it is that you're eating as plant-based substitutes, there's no reason you can't eat that after a hard session in the morning as well. You know, cereal is just cereal because of marketing by Kellogg's. Yeah. You know, you don't have to eat a breakfast cereal at breakfast. You could eat a breakfast cereal in the afternoon if you want a snack as well. There's nothing wrong with that. So
I'll have to try it.
Certainly don't be afraid of that.
Thank you.
Did you have a specific question you wanted to?
No, I think you answered it. I think it's just more this, you know, behavior, this pattern of always having more a breakfast food that's typical of, you know, it's sweeter than because you're right. lunchtime, dinner, especially being vegan, you know, always a bunch of vegetables there. But in the morning, it just seemed so odd. I mean, years ago, before, when I would still, you know, eggs and whatever, you know, there might be like some veggie omelet if I went out, but usually not even at home. But it was just kind of contradicted the conventional thinking of something sweeter for breakfast. Not that a salad can't be sweet, really. So.
Well, exactly. You can make them quite sweet if you want. Are you vegan or vegetarian?
Vegan.
Okay,
no
so
dairy,
no
meat. Yeah.
And no fish?
No fish. I stopped that. I cut out the fish, and then the cheese was the last thing to go in 2013. That was the tough one. So
yeah, I mean, your dietary preference is certainly more challenging than, say, a pescatarian or an lacto-ovo vegetarian, and then certainly more challenging than an omnivore. We would certainly encourage you to do is monitor. So I would get, if you haven't had a blood test as an endurance athlete, I would certainly encourage you to get a blood test and at least review your ferritin and hemoglobin levels, your B12 in particular. As a female vegan athlete, I think that's very important that you have at least a baseline of where you are, because those two particular markers can be negatively affected.
Yeah, I do take B12 every day. And I actually just asked my doctor a couple of weeks ago before I signed up, because I asked, of course, they never offer, you have to be your own advocate. And I just said, you know, I want to get some blood tests. I want to check my, you know, my thyroid and then just the standard stuff. And, you know, it all comes back really good. I haven't tried Inside Tracker yet. Of course, with our great health coverage, you know, or my company health plan, I'll have to pay some out of pocket for that. But it's important to me. I ask every year, at least, you know, more than once, you know, a year, I just request lab tests to be done just to check my iron and all of that. So,
well, yeah, that's a good point for all the other, and for Inside Tracker, don't pay for the draw, just pay for the upload. I think whether you get the discount code from us or every other company that uses them, I don't really care. Get the 25% discount, but just do the upload version. So you can upload, for everyone there, you can just upload your PDFs of past and present blood tests into that. It'll cost you $70 to have a year's worth of Inside Tracker. Like don't pay for the draw. If you're getting the draw done by, because I just had an athlete say they got double draw. They got draw by their doctor and then paid for the draw by Inside Tracker. And I was like, why did you do that? You can just upload the results. Okay. So if you've got historical data that you can upload into Inside Tracker, just literally sign up. I think it's called Test Results Upload. I think it's $99 with the discount. It gives you, it's like $70 or $75. And it's the best $75 you'll spend if you, again, I know there's a lot of females on here that like literally get it done and upload all your old blood tests so you can have it reviewed. I mean, the beautiful thing about Inside Tracker is it's very visual. So even someone who doesn't necessarily understand everything about it, you can at least see what zones you're in, and their zones are typically okay. I don't necessarily agree with all their zones, but you at least get a decent understanding. If you're super low in ferritin and your hemoglobin is bottomed out, then you're probably iron anemic, you know, and that's like the simplest way of looking at it. If your ferritin's very low and your hemoglobin's low, there's a good chance you've got iron deficiency.
And we have a good Q&A session on that. If you go to the YouTube, there is one of the sessions where Scott goes into detail on all the 5 key biomarkers and what, you know, why they're important, and also intervention in terms of if you are not in the optimal range, how to correct them.
Yeah. And a lot of that is, and you know, again, like work with your doctor on this, because the doctor, you know, ultimately is going to be the person responsible for, I guess, your care. Well, that's certainly how it works in Australia. You know, you should be working with, if you've got a good doctor, their relationship and them reviewing sort of your bloods and working alongside with other health professionals should be sort of their priority. And you're not Gen Pop. All of you are trying to do something that is not normal. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. Like, you know, running a marathon after 180 Ks on a bike is like not normal for the everyday person. I think I saw some stats the other day about marathon. It's something like 2.1% of Americans have run a marathon. Like, so whatever you think is normal is so far from normal that in relation to what you require and where your iron levels should be and where your B12, where your vitamin D, where all this stuff is, it can't be like lower end of normal. It should be higher end of optimized. And I think that's a really important point for all of you is like, you know, don't think of yourself as just being like mediocre and being like, treat yourself as an athlete because that's what you are. Does anyone have any more? And feel free, just like jump in and just ask questions based on anything I'm saying. Like, don't be shy.
I think Scott had a question, right? On
Yeah, Scotty, what were you going to ask about? So
Yeah,
was it
actually-
about heat?
Yeah, actually, just a follow-up question on the Inside Tracker. So it just a regular blood draw that you get from your doctor, you can upload. There's not a specific sort of panel or type of blood draw that Inside Tracker requests through their service?
No. So you can upload your PDF. Now, depending on what your doctor takes is obviously going to have an impact on what's being presented in Inside Tracker. So they won't present every marker in Inside Tracker. So I don't think they present things like TSH and T4 in there in relation to thyroid, because what they're not comfortable with doing is then nutritional recommendations based around thyroid, because their view is there's not enough robust evidence or scientific literature to support the recommendations for something like that. But if you go through your doctor and request the blood panel that we set out in the initial email, so we will have sent you what we think is a good panel to be requested by your doctor and get that done. Pretty much all those markers will be accounted for by Inside Tracker.
and Scotty, I'm happy to resend that if you don't have that list.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah, that's a much better, more affordable way to.
Well, because if you've got health insurance in the state, like I know how expensive. I mean, we're lucky in Australia. We can go to our doctor and get a blood draw and it's free. But for you guys, it's like, it costs a lot of money. And if your insurance covers it, then just use your insurance company and then just pay, $60 or $70 to upload it into Inside Tracker. What was your question about heat?
Yeah, heat. So the question is really around, I've been a bit challenged getting down the right level of carbohydrate after being in heat for a long time. So the example of St. George was a good example where, on the bike for a long time in the heat, I was able to get down, the right amount of carbohydrates, about 90 grams, the right amount of sodium, about 1,500 milligrams, the right amount of fluids, about 1 liter is what I was doing. But then I got off the bike and took off on the run, and as Jonathan knows, you run out of town uphill, which was a little bit of a rough run, and I just wasn't able to get any fuel into the body. It was, I might've been mildly heat exhausted or something, but I guess, so the question really is, so in that position where you absolutely need the fuel more than probably any other time, what are some strategies to get something down, or, what is the best way to solve that problem?
So I guess just so everyone understands, as intensity increases and temperature increases, gastric emptying rates are going to slow. So that's part of the problem with racing in the heat under intensity. So first question to you, Scotty, did you do a lot of the heat training? Did you do much training in heat? Did you do the hot water protocol?
No, unfortunately. So that's definitely something that I'm gonna start on, because you guys have some great recommendations around that. So that was a mistake on my part for sure. Yeah.
So I think, and the hot water immersion protocol, or whether you do a sauna protocol, certainly will help in terms of some of that heat acclimation, and certainly can help with managing heat stress. I think the other point being is you need to be practicing under heat conditions. So i.e. you're on the bike, you're on the trainer, but your thermostat is above 85 in there. You don't have a cool fan on you. You're not like cruising around at, 60 and feeling great, because that's not what's going to happen in the race. You need to be, specific to what you're trying to do. And there's that SAID principle, isn't there? The specific adaptation to implied demand. if you want to perform really well at heat, you've got to perform well in heat in training. And it's no different from training the gut. If you want to consume and be able to assimilate huge amounts of carbohydrates in a race, you need to practice that. So physiologically, your small intestine learns to adapt to that. Gastric emptying from the gut learns to adapt to that. You need to then do huge amounts of carbohydrates in training, but also under then the external stresses of higher temperature. And I think that's probably, there's no magic bullet there. It's like, you just need to practice under heat stress, because if heat stress is what's causing the issues, that's where you need to practice. And so I would be practicing, with extra layers. I mean, you watch, what's her name? I have a mental blank. I was watching some videos of her training in the heat recently. I can't remember her name. And, she was just buckets of sweat coming off her, but training under duress. And that's the key. Like, that's what you need to be doing, and practicing those bricks as well. So, that run on the treadmill, again, under temperatures where it's not going to be comfortable and probably above what you plan on racing in. And that will make a huge difference, because physiologically you will adapt to that as you go. And it's not nice. Like, it's not very pretty. And I was listening, there are some, I was listening to a podcast, and I've seen it before, the core temperature sort of units that you can strap on, and how they're, whether they're measuring your internal core temperature, or at least giving you an understanding of how your internal core temperature is increasing, and how that then may have a negative impact. You may see through those recordings that, okay, as my core temperature goes up, and when you hit a certain threshold, that potentially that's where you need to train above in order to improve your ability to tolerate the carbohydrates.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then a follow-up, is a steam a good replacement for a sauna, or is there something very specific about a sauna versus a steam?
I haven't seen any data done on steam rooms, but I guess if the temperature is similar to a sauna, then I imagine it would still have a similar effect, but I couldn't be definitive on that. I think sauna, you have to get up to, like, I think it's 168 or 170, something like that. I think that, now I'm pretty sure that's Fahrenheit, isn't it?
Yeah. My understanding is that steam rooms don't get hot enough, because
I think that's the problem, because you get
like, it would
burnt by
burn
the
you.
steam. I think you get burnt by the steam when it gets to that temperature. So, I think you stick to the saunas, or you stick to the hot water immersion in your bathtub. I don't know. The bathtub's probably the easiest, because you just, put a Netflix 30-minute episode on and just immerse up to your neck in that and go for it. But it is hard to sit in 40-degree. I don't know. Has everyone done hot water immersion? Has anyone done it? No. So we've got the protocol. Sorry, who was that? Karen, you've done it?
Karen, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't sound hard, but actually sitting in 40-degree water, and again, 40 degrees isn't actually as hot as you need to get. Like, that's probably close to starting point. You gradually, some of the studies have people up to 80 Celsius in the water. But, when you're in 40-degree Celsius heat up to your neck for 30 minutes, it does get pretty uncomfortable. And the protocol that we have is you're doing that for a minimum of 11 days out from a race. You generally aim for 11 to 14 days, and you can finish that protocol sort of 2 to 3 days before the race, because the carryover of the physiological effects will be for up to 7 to 9 days post protocol. But it works. I can tell you now, the athletes who do it and they go and race in Miami, or they race in humid, hot temperatures, they're like, the last thing that I was even concerned about was the hot temperature. So I would certainly advocate, if you've got an issue with heat, then you need to be practicing with it.
If you're training in the heat, but not every day.
Who's saying that?
Matt.
Oh, sorry, Matt. There. Sorry.
Right. If you're training in the heat, say summertime, you're training in the heat, but not some days, I'm inside training and whatnot. Could I do the combination of training in the heat and the hot water immersion?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so you have acclimation versus acclimatization. Acclimatization is actually training in the temperature that you're actually doing, whereas acclimation is sort of a false physiological change as a result of dumping yourself in an artificial environment to create that change. So if you're like, you know, we have athletes in Miami and stuff where are you based?
Rhode Island, the Northeast.
Oh, it's not hot there.
Not now.
So yeah, I mean, if it's hot enough during the day and you're getting that sort of heat training in, and you know that's going to be comparable to where you're going to be racing, then that potentially is enough. But I'd certainly then just go, you know, you sort of do your super threshold type stuff. You train above threshold, and then everything below that becomes easier. It's a bit with heat. I think with the heat training, if you're so used to training at above temperature of what you're going to be in, or like that uncomfortable sort of feeling, you get to, you know, the race conditions, you're like, oh, this is a doddle, you know, it's so easy then. So it's the same with pushing carbohydrates through you. If you're used to consuming, say, 100, 120 grams an hour and on the bike, and then you go, okay, for races, I'm only going to consume 90 grams an hour. That drop in 30 grams an hour, it's like, oh, wow, like it just, everything becomes so much easier. When you push the intake in training, everything in racing then becomes a much easier process.
Sure.
So I saw a question come in from Jenny. Did you want to ask, or did you want me to read your question?
Yeah, mute. Yeah, I can ask. Hi.
Jenny.
I'm about on week 3 of the program, and the question relates to how to practice fueling on the long weekend training rides. I'm in Purple Patch, and I'm still on baseline, where the longest rides are pretty low intensity still, but my first race is early July. So I've been following the do a bar every 45 minutes to an hour, knowing that's not how I'll do it during the race. I've done 70.3s before, so I've got some idea of what I'll use, but I do want to try to do more of the practicing race feeling and trying to figure out, so should I just do it anyhow?
I mean, obviously we work in conjunction to the training program being delivered to us and to you. So you're in a little bit of, and it's not a circumstance that we haven't seen before, is, you know, do you reach out to Purple Patch? Do you reach out to one of the coaches and say, hey, look, I've got a race in 2 months. I need my plan adjusted specifically to what I require. Because we're then going to adjust that. Now you could do that yourself. I don't know. Can you adjust your training program and adjust the sets?
I am going to apply a 4-week race build, just, you know, in the final lead up to it, basically, and that'll have more intensity in the longer sessions. And then later in the summer, I'm doing the longer race build before the next one, where there will be more chances. But
I mean, if you're talking July, you're what, 6 weeks out? Is that right?
About 8. Stuff.
8 weeks. I mean, I would be doing pretty much every weekend. I'd be trying to do race fueling, which if that means that like if you're going to change the sessions to what and make them race pace and probably make them bricks. Again, I'm not going to jump in and tell you what coaching you should be doing, but if you understand what I'm saying, like we would be saying, okay, well, you need to be doing race pace bricks, because you've got one opportunity every weekend for the next 8 weeks to get that dialed in. So whether you do that or whether you speak to a coach at Purple Patch and then start to do that, but all we need to see in Training Peaks, you need to change the title of the session to Z3, change the intensity to Z3. We'll then provide you with the recommendations, and then you start to see how that works.
Okay, great.
Do speak to them, change it. But ideally what we would see building into a race is some of those. And are you doing 70.3 or Ironman?
Yeah, 70.3.
So some 90/90s, depending on how fast you are, or 90/60s, 90 minutes on the bike, or maybe a little 60/60s, 90/90s, 90/60s, something like that. 90 of the first one being the bike, the second one being the run, and practicing your race fueling appropriately with that, and recording the data appropriately with what you're finding, because you need to start to train the gut to tolerate the amount of carbohydrates that you intend to use in the race, and also work out what products you're going to be using on the bike. Is it electrolytes with a little bit of carb in it to bolster up the ability to consume, say, gels and blocks, and maybe a bar at 60, again, depending. 70.3, would I recommend a bar? Depends how fast you are. I mean, what sort of time are you looking at finishing it?
5.5 to 6, probably.
Okay, so a bar may be appropriate for you at that 60-minute mark, just purely from a caloric standpoint, knowing that you're going over that sort of 5.5 to 6 hour period. If you're a much faster athlete, sort of, certainly, 4 to 5 hours in the low 4s, then, you're probably not going to be consuming a bar because you're just purely going for carbohydrate because your intensity is going to be much higher.
Jenny, are
Great,
you on the
that's helpful.
squad program?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Yeah, and I
So
think
if
I've underfueled 70.3s before. So just going with my usual plan, probably, I mean, I want to try to do it differently and follow the recommendations that you guys have. So yeah.
What's your current intake on the bike in terms of grams of carbs per hour?
Well, doing the 1 bar and doing the lower intensity rides, about 25 to 30. In a race, it's been about 60, like in a previous 70.3.
If you're getting up to 60, it's good. But I like my belief now, and certainly what our belief is that if you can really maximize the intake of fuel on the bike, what it does is spare your endogenous carbohydrate stores, so your glycogen stores in your muscle and liver. And if you can spare that, keep your blood glucose fairly stable by taking in exogenous carbohydrates, so those blocks, gels, maybe some liquid, then you get to the run and you're good to go. You've got heaps left in the tank, and that's what's going to make the difference. You don't get off the bike and feel like crap. You get off the bike into the run and you're like, okay, now it's go time. And that's where you will pass a lot of the athletes.
Right.
So yeah, push. I would say your minimum aiming for is getting closer to 80 to 90 grams an hour, and anything above that's going to be absolute bonus. But I think if you, as a female athlete in your age group and your sort of pace, I think if you can get somewhere around that 80 grams an hour, that extra 20 grams an hour on the bike, it's probably going to serve you really well. And then it just comes down to your tolerance with that.
I have one last question for you on that.
Yeah.
I'm really used to using Skratch as the liquid, and that's enabled me. That's probably what's enabled me to even get to like 60 before. But I see the recommendation, and I do use the pH brand too. But would you recommend someone like me, my size, use Skratch plus like the blocks and the gels?
It comes down to personal, again, like, do you get a lot of GI distress off the bike? Do you feel bad when you get off the bike?
Careful. Not when I'm really, really careful about like low fiber the few days beforehand and all that. And I like the Cliff Blocks. It's been Cliff Blocks and the Skratch before, basically.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to, and again, like, I hope you're not being careful in terms of intensity. Like, I guess you want to push your power and you want to push the speed and ultimately not be worried about the GI issues. So if the Skratch sits with you, fine. And again, there's different forms of Skratch. If you're comfortable with it and you are hitting top numbers with that and no issues, then certainly go with it. Again, as long as it works for you, but you just now need to start to increase that. So if you're using Skratch as the liquid form of carbohydrates, you're probably going to have to top up with, say, an extra, pH gel, or 3 Cliff Block or a pack of Cliff Blocks in that hour as well to get you up to that sort of 80, 90 grams.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Questions?
There's a question from Anne-Marie. She's at work, so I'm going to read out the question for her.
Yeah.
If I'm doing a mix of gels and liquid nutrition on bike, is there a preference on when to use gels during the bike? Better at the start, or it doesn't matter as long as you're training with the nutrition?
I think using the gels closer as you get closer into the run, and there's no real reasoning for this. I don't know whether it just gets through the gut quicker into the small intestine, but I think if you are going to use fluids, use them at the start. and then transition into just your water and electrolyte. Same with blocks, and then transitioning into gels as you get closer into the T2 and into the run. That would be the recommendation. That's just practically speaking. I think it just seems to work better. There doesn't seem like, in terms of the research, there doesn't seem to be any difference in terms of oxidation rates of carbohydrate based on whether it's gel, block, or fluid. There certainly does seem to be some differences with bars, because bars, I think, are just so much bigger, and breaking it down obviously takes longer within the gut.
Right. So there's two questions from Molly, who isn't on, so I'll just ask for her. What are the steps for sweat testing? Is it just weigh yourself before and after and track fluid intake and bathroom stops?
Yeah, Trish, could I just get you to put your mic on mute, please? Thanks. Yeah, look, the sweat testing, I guess, is just a a cute way of saying weigh yourself before and after the events. And in the athlete section, so the bottom right-hand section of our app, you will see, you can click on that and then go into the sweat test section. And so what you want to be doing there is recording yourself before and after the sessions, recording what you consumed in terms of fluids. And then it will do the data, it will do the calculations to work out what your sweat rate was, what your fluid intake rate was, and what the percentage of body weight lost was. It's the same with the carbohydrate intake or testing. It's the same thing. You're recording what you were consuming, and then based on the duration, it will calculate the grams per hour that you consumed, and also the grams per kilo body weight. Now, there is a significant update to the way we're going to be presenting that in the app, which is going to, I think it will be a massive game changer for everyone in terms of, for the sweat rate or for the sweat data, seeing a very succinct summary of what your sweat rate is as an average, as a peak, what your fluid intake is as an average and a peak, sodium intake, what you're managing, and so on. And same for the carbohydrates, and splitting that across bike, run, and overall, and bike, run, brick for the sweat testing. So it's going to be much easier for you to see all your historical data and then any future data, and then actually providing you with meaningful numbers and what that means from a practical sense as to recommendations for fluids and carbohydrates, which will be great. So that should be, I don't know, everything takes longer in tech world, but hopefully it happens in the next sort of two to 3 weeks would be the hope for that.
So I have a question about that.
Yeah.
How do you account for solid carbohydrates that you've ingested? Like I had I think it was a 2.5 hour ride, and I was to do a sweat test and a carb test. And I actually weighed more at the end. So then I added up the ounces of the solid food that I ate and subtracted that from my ending weight. And then that gave me a sweat test that was more in line with the others I'd done, but I didn't know if that was the right way to do it. I knew I wasn't supposed to weigh more afterward.
I mean, I'd say how many grams of how many blocks and gels did you take on?
I don't recall, but it was like a couple of picky bars, and yeah, I mean, it was enough to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, you'd take in, like, let's say you took in, I mean, excess, like fairly high amount. You might be taking in, yeah, okay, 400, 500 grams. I guess you could say, okay, that extra 500 grams, you probably should account for. I guess you will also lose some of that in heat and energy lost. It's sort of, again, like when you're looking at the numbers, you're looking at them as not an absolute, but an indicator. And I think that's really important. Like you can't say like, okay, on a 2.5 hour run or a 2.5 hour bike, I'm exactly going to lose 0.66 liters per hour. You're probably going to have some fluctuation there and variation between like 0.6 and 0.75. So therefore, after repeated testing, you build a picture. And you go, you know what, at less than 85 Fahrenheit on the bike at race pace, I lose roughly a bottle an hour. So therefore I need to be consuming just under a bottle an hour in a race in order to maintain some sort of hydration sort of status. And that's the point of repetition of testing, is that a single test will give you very little information. It's what you do with the repetitive nature of the testing and repeating actually also the practice of drinking that amount or eating that amount that's going to give you the most value in this. And it probably, it sounds a bit tedious for some people, but honestly, the being consistent with your consistency is what's going to bring the biggest results here. And don't even with, has anyone had the pH test for sodium? Like what's in their salt? Like it tells you what did you get told?
Oh, it was high. It was like 1300.
1300, but you don't have to replace 1300 milligrams
Right.
of sodium in every liter of fluid you consume. And that's the misconception with that, is like, okay, Kathleen, we know you're a higher sodium container. I would say for starters, you're only aiming at about 70% of that amount in any of your bottles. So you're going, okay, I'm taking in say 800 milligrams per liter. You'd be aiming for, because you're also getting sodium from your diet as well. So, and you don't need to replace 100% of sodium lost. It's just an indicator to say you may need, rather than 250 milligrams or 300 milligrams in a bottle, you may need double that. And then you play around with that to see how you actually feel. Because I can guarantee if you took in 1500 milligrams of sodium, and I had this, I can't remember who we were talking to, it was someone who did St. George actually, and had a terrible, he just completely overconsumed sodium, like to the point where it was like, because his fluid intake dropped so much because he forgot to take his bottles. And so he was going through the aid stations and drinking, but he wasn't drinking enough, but he was still dumping a pH 1500 tab every aid station. I think he was taking in something like 3000 milligrams of sodium per liter, we worked out. And I was like, why did you do that? And he's like, I just got lost. And he just didn't understand how much he needed in terms of, his fluid intake, and didn't adjust it accordingly because he hadn't done enough to understand what he needed.
Okay.
So just when you're doing all this testing, like treat it like it's not absolutes. It's to give you indications based on what type of session you're doing, whether it's a bike or a run. Generally, sweat rates will go up in a run versus a bike. Temperatures, they're going to have an effect on that. Generally, we break it down to under 85 or greater than 85. So 30 degrees Celsius below or above. And then the intensity is going to have, and then you're going to start to build a picture of, okay, this is how I'm going to manage it with either 2 bottles or 3 bottle program, and manage it that way.
Okay, thanks.
Cool.
There's a question, another question from Molly that came through is, how many grams of carbohydrates should we attempt in our first carb test session?
I think it comes down to individuals. Like if you've got a history of GI, I wouldn't push it too hard. I'd probably aim for maybe what you just establish a baseline. This is what I do. This is what I typically do. Let's have a look at that. And that may be 25, 30 grams an hour. And then we go, okay, well, did you get any GI distress with that? What products were you taking? How did you feel? Okay, well, if you did get some GI distress with that low amount, what was in those products and what type of products, i.e. was it liquid or solid? Let's adjust that. Maybe you'd adjust that and then go for the same volume. No issues. Okay, now we start to build on that. And it's probably just going to be incremental. You may be aiming for an increase of 10 grams an hour, 15 grams an hour. On top of that, depending how long you've got until your race, in terms of Jenny doesn't have that long to do. So she's going to have to start to push those amounts and probably start with a higher baseline. And if in your head, you're like, okay, I think in a race, I consume 60 grams an hour, I would say start at around that level and then just start to increase from there. Any other questions, Joe?
Scott, is there a downside of consuming kind of that sodium level that is prescribed by the sweat test, or is it individual in terms of kind of what you practice with and work through?
Do you mean like if they tell you 1200 milligrams, should you be consuming that?
Correct.
Yeah, I wouldn't be consuming that.
And what is the downside?
Oh, I think, overconsumption of sodium can have health implications. So increasing systolic blood pressure and so on. So, if you've got a sodium intolerance and that, you could be negatively impacting your health. So I would just be wary of, I think it's a really good test to get an understanding. If you think you're a really high sodium sweater, then I think it gives you a good indication of what you may require. If you don't end up with heaps of white salt patches all over you, then there's probably a good indication that you're not a high sodium sweater. You probably contain something like 300 to 600 milligrams per liter is probably going to be somewhere thereabouts. And therefore, the need for heaps of sodium in your drink bottles in terms of electrolytes is probably going to be diminished. And certainly, Scotty, I think you're a high sweater sodium. Is that what they told you?
Yes. Yeah.
What was your number?
1,500.
1,500. So, I think we started with like 1,000, didn't we? You got like 1,000 in your, you aim for somewhere around 1,000 per liter. And that seems to work really well for you. And I think it's just as long as you monitor that, you monitor your performance and your symptoms and making sure that you had some issues in the heat, perhaps dropping down that sodium concentration of your products and making them less salty, that could have a significant impact on how you respond in terms of to heat stress injury as well. Or heat stress. So I would play around with that and maybe just start. I always think you're better off erring on lower amounts of sodium than higher amounts of sodium. And as long as you're not cramping or feeling terrible, then I'd say you potentially bring that down.
So is the equation better to push your carbohydrate as high as possible and then
definitely
monitor the sodium down?
Your sodium's not the thing that's going to make you go fast. Carbs are going to make you go fast. So if you can improve your ability and your physiologically, if you can improve what's happening inside you to tolerate more carbohydrates and process them and get them through into the bloodstream, then again, like as I said, you're sparing your stored glycogen, which is going to have a huge impact on your race ability. So carbs are, your ability to process carbohydrates at high amounts and do that repetitively is what's going to make the difference.
Great. And there's a few other questions that came in earlier that we didn't cover from past sessions. So one, and Jenny, I don't know if this is still on your mind, but one of your questions you had submitted in the past was, is it best to try to hit exact numbers for macros and calories as much as possible? Or that's the assumption. Is there one that's more important, e.g. like carbs versus calories?
Yeah, I think, with all of this, like at the start, okay, a lot of you are tracking. And I think as much as anything, that's a little bit of education, especially if you've never done it before, and educating yourselves like on what you're eating. So to Pam's point, like, suddenly starting to realize how much fiber she's taking in on a daily basis or how much protein she's consuming. It's often a bit of an eye opener for a lot of people. The protein intake is set quite high. So I think if you're not quite hitting that protein amount, don't be too worried. If you stay somewhere within, 15 to 20 grams of the target being made, then you're probably going to be fine. Certainly if you are a lighter female athlete or male athlete and you're sort of only 100, if you're getting prescribed 120 grams of protein, then try and get as close to that as possible, because ultimately that's 4 meals of 30 grams of protein, which shouldn't be too hard to do. I understand as you get heavier, if you're, getting prescribed 160, 180, some male athletes have got 220 grams of protein to hit, you're probably not going to hit that every day, but as long as you're sort of teetering with that higher protein intake, then it's going to be beneficial to you. I think, again, I would try and slightly overshoot calories, to be honest. If you are tracking and you're worried about hitting exact numbers, I would probably just go a little bit above rather than a little bit below. And I know that might seem counterintuitive, but I think the biggest thing here, and I think what we're learning more, is the athletes who are fueled appropriately and fueled very well, it allows you to perform your sessions very, very well for what is your coach is demanding of you. And I think that's a really important point, is that you actually feel great going into the session, during the session, and post session, you're feeling really good. And throughout the rest of the day, you're feeling really good, as opposed to really lethargic. So I think if you are feeling really terrible consistently, maybe like 1 day, fine, 2 days, fine. We'll have up and down days, you push through it. But if you're feeling like consecutive days, 3, 4 days where you're just like, I got nothing, you need to reach out. You need to potentially change, the goal. If your weight goal is like 20 pounds below what your current weight is, then we're going to be dropping calories because we need to be in a caloric deficit in order to achieve some weight loss. But if your coach is giving you a training program, which is like high intensity, lots of duration, lots of volume, change it. Just put your body weight to what your current body weight is, and you'll see a significant difference in calories being prescribed, because ultimately the purpose of that training block is to actually perform at your absolute best, not to try and lose weight. And we need, like, the athletes thinking about what the purpose is as much as what we're thinking about what the purpose is as well, because we can only do as much as what you as the athletes are telling us. And that's really important to understand.
And a related note, Scott, so for lighter athletes that are struggling to meet the calorie goals, so let's say protein's fine, but under on carbs at the end of the day, would you recommend trying to close that deficit? And how would they do that?
Yeah, and if, again, high protein intake is probably going to increase that feeling of fullness and satiety. So maybe just drop the protein down a little bit. Be strategic how you get that extra protein in. It might be just within a shake, and that shake may just purely be protein and maybe the creatine with water, as opposed to putting in, say, oats and banana and making a smoothie. Smoothies will tend to make you very full. So I had a conversation with an athlete this morning, and he was putting in a lot of extra ingredients into the shake, and then he was like feeling very, very full from that, and then not eating dinner. And I was like, just put in 150 mils of water with that protein amount. He's a vegan, for instance, and he's just not hitting his protein amount. Add in the equivalent of 30 to 40 grams of protein in that with your 5 grams of creatine. Just drink it for the purpose of getting it in, move on to actually then eating a meal. So he's just fortifying his normal diet by doing that. Now, drop your protein down a little bit. Maybe in the case of if you're missing out on calories and carbohydrates, that's when a shake in the reverse of what he was doing could be beneficial. So you could blend in, some nut butter for some extra fat calories. You could blend in a banana. You could blend in some oats just to top up that liquid calorie amount to then get in the total amount of calories that you require, in particular carbohydrates.
Final question. This was Satish. I don't know if this is still a question, but you had submitted this earlier last month. Is there an optimal length of time between a snack and a meal? Sometimes if a workout is late in the afternoon or early evening after work, the snack following the workout ends up being consumed just before dinner.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of management there with timing of sessions. I guess it's sometimes tough. I mean, what you could do is have a snack before. If the session finishes so close to dinner, then I would just have dinner and then treat the snack that was recommended as maybe dessert and have it as a dessert. That's how I'd do it. So whatever you're planning on having as a post-workout snack, just have that after dinner or have it earlier in the day. Again, it's managing your sessions based around what your timing is. We obviously have certain sections within our timing of where we think, snack 1, breakfast, snack 2, lunch, and so on is going to fit. But depending on, what culturally, you may have very late dinners or very early dinners, depending on who you are as an individual. So you will just have to manage that appropriately. There is some advantage in eating very close to sessions in terms of training the brain, in terms of perception of gut fullness. So if you're someone who struggles with the feeling of being very full when exercising, then eating, 5 or 10 minutes before a session actually has been shown to improve perception of gut fullness. And if you do that repetitively, it can actually improve the sensation of fullness and GI distress as well. So that's something you could consider using.